The northern wind howled across the fjord, carrying with it the smell of salt and winter's promise. It was the year 876, and the waters of Vestfjord churned beneath a sky heavy with storm clouds. Torstein Magnusson stood at the edge of his father's longhouse, watching as the ships returned from the autumn raids. His broad shoulders tense beneath his woolen tunic, his hand instinctively reaching for a sword that wasn't there. "They return with glory," said Hakon, his father's oldest friend, coming to stand beside him. "Your father's ship leads them." Torstein nodded, his eyes fixed on the dragon-headed prow cutting through the choppy waters. He should have been with them. At 25 winters, he had proven himself in battle many times over. But his father, Jarl Magnus, had ordered him to remain behind after the dream speakers had warned of ill omens. "My place was with them," Torstein said, his voice low and tense. Hakon's weathered face crinkled with concern. "Your father sought to protect you." "I need no protection," Torstein replied sharply. "I am no child to be left behind while others claim the glory." The ships drew closer to shore, and Torstein could make out the figures of warriors lining the decks. His father's vessel was laden with treasure, gleaming metals and fabrics from the Saxon lands. But there was something else, something Torstein couldn't quite see from this distance. As the raiders disembarked, carrying their spoils to shore, Jarl Magnus approached his son. Blood and salt spray had dried on his beard, but his eyes shone with triumph. "The gods favored us, my son," he said, clasping Torstein's shoulder. "Though the Saxon monastery was well defended, we prevailed." Torstein inclined his head respectfully, though resentment still burned in his chest. "I am glad to see you return whole, father." "I bring something for you," Magnus said, gesturing to two warriors who struggled with a long, cloth-wrapped bundle. "A gift to ease your wounded pride." The men laid the bundle at Torstein's feet and stepped back. Torstein knelt, unwrapping the oilskin to reveal a sword unlike any he had ever seen. The blade gleamed silver in the dim light, runes etched along its length. The hilt was wrapped in leather, with a pommel carved into the shape of a wolf's head, its eyes set with amber stones that seemed to glow with an inner fire. "We found it in the monastery's treasury," Magnus explained. "The Christians had it locked away as if they feared its power. The monk who guarded it called it Ulfbert." Torstein's hand hovered over the weapon, feeling a strange warmth emanating from the metal. "It is fine craft work," he admitted, trying to mask the awe in his voice. "It is more than that," his father said quietly. "The monk said it belonged to a great Norse warrior who fell in their lands generations ago. They kept it as a trophy, but now it returns to its people." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "The old woman says it was meant for you." Torstein's eyes snapped up to his father's face. "Volva Gunhild said this." Magnus nodded gravely. "She came to me before we sailed. She said a blade of legend would find its way to you, and that it would lead you to your wyrd." Torstein's fingers closed around the hilt, and a jolt seemed to pass through his arm. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard a woman's voice, distant but clear, speaking words in a language he didn't recognize yet somehow understood. "Find me." Across the sea in the kingdom of Northumbria, Orla Fletcher stood at the window of her father's hall, watching Saxon soldiers train in the yard below. 3 years had passed since the Vikings had raided their monastery, killing her uncle, the abbot, and stealing treasures that had been safeguarded for generations. Her father, Lord Fletcher, had increased the number of his household guards since then, determined that they would not be caught unprepared again. "My lady," said Edith, her handmaiden, entering the chamber with a bundle of linen, "your father requests your presence in the great hall. The bishop has arrived." Orla sighed, turning from the window. At 20 summers, she had grown weary of her father's attempts to arrange a marriage for her. Since her mother's death 5 winters ago, Lord Fletcher had become obsessed with securing her future, and by extension, the future of his lands. "Tell him I will be there shortly," she said, smoothing the front of her embroidered gown. Her fingers traced the pattern she had stitched herself, interlocking crosses meant to provide protection against the northern invaders who continued to plague their shores. When she entered the hall, her father and Bishop Elfric were deep in conversation, their heads bent over a map spread across the oak table. "They landed here," her father was saying, pointing to a spot along the coast. A small force, but they managed to burn 2 villages before our men drove them back to their ships. The bishop nodded grimly. They grow bolder each season. The monastery at Lindisfarne reports increased sightings of their longships. Ah, Orla, Lord Fletcher said, noticing her presence. Come, child. The bishop brings news from the north. Orla approached, offering a respectful bow to the cleric. Your Grace. Bishop Elfric smiled at her, though his eyes remained troubled. Lady Orla. You are as lovely as ever, a beacon of grace in these troubled times. She returned his smile politely, knowing what would come next. Sure enough, her father cleared his throat. Bishop Elfric and I have been discussing matters of importance to the kingdom, he began. Including the need for strong alliances in the face of these heathen attacks. Father, Orla started, but he raised a hand to silence her. Lord Mercia's son has expressed interest in your hand, he continued. It would be a powerful union, joining our lands with theirs. A defense against the Northmen. Orla felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Lord Mercia's son is nearly 40 years old and has buried 2 wives already. Her father's expression hardened. He is a strong leader and a devout Christian. In these times, we cannot afford to indulge in romantic notions of marriage. My lord, the bishop interjected gently, perhaps we might discuss this further when a commotion at the entrance to the hall interrupted him. A guard rushed in, his face flushed with exertion. My lord! Raiders have been spotted off the eastern shore. 3 ships! Lord Fletcher leapt to his feet, reaching for the sword that hung beside his chair. Sound the alarm! Get the women and children to the church. Orla remained still as chaos erupted around her. Servants scattered, guards rushed to their posts, and her father barked orders to his captain. The bishop's hand closed around her arm. Come, child, he urged. We must get you to safety. But Orla pulled away, moving instead toward the small side chamber where her father kept his most valuable possessions. There is something I must retrieve first. Orla, her father shouted. Do as the bishop says. She ignored him, ducking into the chamber and making straight for the small wooden chest tucked beneath a table. From it, she withdrew a leather-bound book, her mother's journal, filled with the stories and songs of their people. She clutched it to her chest and turned to leave, but something caught her eye, a glint of metal beneath a cloth on the table. Curious, she lifted the fabric to reveal a knife unlike any she had seen before. Small, compared to a warrior's weapon, but finely crafted, with strange symbols etched into its blade. Without understanding why, she slipped it into the fold of her gown beside the book. As she re-entered the hall, a thunderous crash shook the building. The Vikings had reached the gates. Torstein led his men up the beach, their boots crunching on the frozen shingle. Winter was not the usual season for raiding, but the Ulfbert sword had given him no peace. Night after night, he dreamed of a stone hall overlooking the sea, and a woman with hair the color of fire. The dream always ended the same way, with her reaching out to him, her lips forming words he couldn't hear. This is madness, muttered Bjorn, his shield brother, as they approached the Saxon settlement. 3 ships against a fortified hall. Your father will have your head when we return, if we return. We are not here to raid, Torstein replied, his eyes fixed on the stone building that matched the one from his dreams. We are here to find something. What could be worth this risk? Bjorn demanded. Torstein's hand went to the sword at his hip. Since claiming the Ulfbert, he had felt its pull, drawing him across the sea like a lodestone finding true north. I will know when I find it. They had taken the Saxons by surprise, landing at dawn when the winter mist still clung to the shore. But the alarm had sounded quickly, and now armed men poured from the hall, forming a defensive line. Remember, Torstein called to his warriors, we seek only what belongs to us. Kill only those who stand in our way. The Saxons met them with a clash of steel and wood. Torstein cut his way through their lines, the Ulfbert moving in his hand as if it had a will of its own. Each strike found its mark with uncanny precision, and the blade seemed to sing as it cleaved through shield and mail. He fought his way to the hall's entrance, Bjorn at his back. Inside, chaos reigned as servants fled and guards rushed to defend their lord. Torstein's eye scanned the room, searching for something. The sword grew warm in his hand, pulling him toward a side passage. "This way," he said to Bjorn, following the weapon's guidance. They moved deeper into the hall, encountering less resistance as they went. The passage opened into a great chamber where a grey-haired man in fine clothing stood with his sword drawn, a younger man in priest's robes beside him. "Heathen filth," the older man spat. "You will not defile this place." Torstein raised the elfbert, its runes gleaming in the torchlight. "I come for what is ours," he said in the Saxon tongue, which he had learned from a thrall in his father's household. The man's eyes widened as they fell on the sword. "That blade," he whispered. "Where did you get it?" Before Torstein could answer, a flash of movement caught his eye. A woman emerged from behind a tapestry, clutching something to her chest. Her hair fell in waves the color of autumn leaves, and her eyes, green as the summer fjords, met his with defiance rather than fear. Time seemed to slow as they regarded each other. The sword in Torstein's hand thrummed with energy, and in his mind, he heard that same voice from before, "Found you." The older man lunged forward, breaking the moment. Torstein parried his attack easily, sending the man's sword spinning from his grip. He placed the tip of the elfbert at the Saxon's throat. "Father," the woman cried out, stepping forward. "Stay back, Orla," the man commanded. Orla. The name resonated in Torstein's mind like the echo of a war horn. This was why he had been drawn here, not for gold or glory, but for her. A shout from outside broke his concentration. "Torstein!" More Saxons approached from the south, called one of his men. He had moments to decide. With a quick move, he knocked the older man unconscious with the pommel of his sword, then turned to the woman. "You will come with me," he said in her language. Her eyes flashed with fury. "I will die first, Viking." Torstein smiled grimly. "That can be arranged, but it would be a waste." Without warning, he stepped forward and swept her off her feet, throwing her over his shoulder. She fought like a wildcat, beating her fists against his back and screaming curses that would have made even his hardened warriors blush. The priest moved to stop him, but Bjorn blocked his path with a warning growl. "Take what you can carry," Torstein ordered his men as they retreated from the hall. "We sail with the tide." As they raced back to their ships with their captive and what little plunder they had managed to seize, Torstein felt the elfbert grow calm in its scabbard. Whatever destiny the sword had been guiding him toward, he had taken the first step toward fulfilling it. What he couldn't know was that the fiery woman struggling against his grip carried with her a knife bearing the same runes as his sword, the other half of a paired set forged centuries ago, now reunited across the divide of bitter enemies. The sea churned beneath the longship's hull, spray flying over the gunwales as they fought their way north through a rising storm. Orla sat huddled in the stern, wrapped in furs that did little to ward off the biting cold. 3 days had passed since her capture, 3 days of silent fury and desperate planning. The Viking leader, Torstein, she had heard the others call him, watched her constantly. Though he had bound her wrists to prevent her from flinging herself into the sea, he had otherwise treated her with unexpected care, ensuring she had food and shelter from the worst of the weather. "You should eat," he said now, approaching with a wooden bowl of stew. His Saxon was rough but understandable. "The storm grows worse. You will need strength." Orla turned her face away. "I would rather starve than accept anything from you, heathen." A smile quirked at the corner of his mouth. "You have spirit, Saxon. But starving will not help you escape or avenge your father." Her head snapped around, eyes blazing. "What do you know of my father? Did your men kill him?" "He lives," Torstein replied calmly. "Or did when we left. I struck him only to quiet him." Relief flooded through her, though she tried not to show it. "Why have you taken me?" "If it's ransom you want, I do not want Saxon silver," he interrupted, setting the bowl beside her. "I brought you because the sword demanded it." Orla stared at him, wondering if he was mad or if this was some kind of cruel jest. "Swords do not make demands." Torstein touched the hilt of the weapon at his side. This one does. It has led me to you, though I do not yet understand why. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air ran down Orla's spine. The small knife she had taken from her father's chamber, now hidden in the folds of her gown, seemed to grow warm against her thigh. Before she could respond, a massive wave crashed over the ship's side, drenching them both. The vessel lurched violently, and Orla would have been thrown if Torstein hadn't caught her arm, steadying her. "Torstein," shouted one of the warriors from the bow. "Land ahead!" Torstein's grip on her arm remained firm as he peered through the driving snow. "We cannot make the fjord in this storm," he called back. "We'll shelter in the cove." He turned to Orla, his expression grave. "The gods test us. If we survive this night, perhaps we will learn why our fates are entwined." As the crew fought to guide the ship toward the distant shoreline, Orla felt the knife against her leg like a promise. If the gods, his or hers, had indeed brought them together, they would soon discover it was not for peace. The longship scraped against the shingle of a small, sheltered bay, and the warriors leaped out to drag it further ashore. Torstein cut Orla's bonds but kept a firm grip on her arm as he helped her from the vessel. "Try to run, and the wolves will have you before you reach the trees," he warned. The beach gave way to a rocky slope, atop which stood a cluster of abandoned fishing huts. The Vikings quickly claimed the largest for Torstein and set about making the others habitable. Inside the crude shelter, Torstein built a small fire. The space was tight, forcing them to sit close to one another. Orla huddled as far from him as possible, watching him warily across the flames. "How long will you keep me prisoner?" she asked at last. "You are not a prisoner," he replied. "You are." He paused, searching for the right word. "A puzzle the gods have set before me." Orla laughed bitterly. "Your gods are demons, Viking. They delight in cruelty and bloodshed." Torstein's eyes narrowed. "And your god? Does he not demand the blood of his enemies? Did your priests not bless the swords that have cut down my people?" "Your people came to our shores as murderers and thieves," she shot back. "We defend what is ours." "As do we," he said simply. "The strong survive. It is the way of the world." Orla shook her head in disgust. "There is more to life than strength and survival. There is mercy, compassion, love." "We know love," Torstein interrupted, his voice unexpectedly soft. "We love our families, our kinsmen. We die for those we are bound to by blood and oath." He stared into the fire. "But love will not feed hungry children when winter stretches long, or protect them from those who would take what little we have." Something in his tone gave Orla pause. For the first time, she looked at him, truly looked, and saw not just the fearsome warrior, but a man defending his way of life as surely as she would defend hers. The knife at her thigh seemed to grow heavier, its presence a reminder of the divide between them. Yet as the storm howled outside and the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls of their shelter, that divide no longer seemed quite so unbridgeable. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Torstein emerged from the hut to find his men already preparing to relaunch the ship. The sky promised fair weather, at least for now. "We should reach my father's settlement by nightfall if the wind holds," Bjorn said, coming to stand beside him. Torstein nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "Have the men found any signs of habitation nearby?" "None," Bjorn replied. "This place has been abandoned for some time." He glanced back at the hut. "The Saxon woman, what will happen to her when we return?" "That is for my father to decide," Torstein said, though the thought sat uneasily with him. Captured women typically became thralls, servants or worse. Some were ransomed back to their families if they were of high enough birth. Neither fate seemed right for Orla. "She's not like the others we've taken," Bjorn observed. "She has fire in her." Torstein's hand went to the Elfbert's hilt. "She is connected to this blade somehow. I feel it." Bjorn's expression grew serious. "Be careful, my friend. Magic has its price, and women, especially foreign women, bring complications of their own." Before Torstein could respond, a cry went up from one of the men standing watch on the ridge above the cove. Ships! 3 ships approaching from the south. Torstein cursed, racing up the slope to see for himself. Sure enough, 3 vessels were making their way along the coast, their square sails bearing the markings of the Saxon kingdom of Northumbria. They followed us, Bjorn said grimly. We must leave now, while we still can. Torstein calculated quickly. The Saxon ships were larger, designed for coastal waters rather than the open sea. They carried more men but moved more slowly. His own vessel was outnumbered but faster. We can outrun them if we launch immediately, he decided. Gather the men. Leave everything that isn't essential. As the warriors rushed to obey, Torstein returned to the hut where Orla was just awakening. Your countrymen come for you, he told her, seeing the hope flash in her eyes. But they will not have you. He grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. She resisted, trying to wrench away from him. Why, she demanded. Why take me if not for ransom? What value am I to you? Torstein hesitated, realizing he had no answer that would make sense to her, or even to himself. All he knew was that the thought of letting her go filled him with a dread he couldn't explain. The sword brought me to you, he said finally. Until I understand why, you remain with me. Orla's hand moved to her side, and for a moment, Torstein thought she might draw a weapon. But instead, she straightened her shoulders and met his gaze steadily. Then I will pray to my God to deliver me, she said. And if he does not, I will find my own way home. Her defiance stirred something in him, respect, yes, but also something warmer, more dangerous. He pushed the feeling aside. Pray if you must, he said gruffly. But know this, where we are going, your God's reach is short. They raced back to the ship, the Saxon vessels drawing closer with each passing moment. As his men pushed the longship back into the water, Torstein lifted Orla into the vessel, noting that she no longer fought him. Instead, she watched the approaching ships with a composed expression that unsettled him more than her resistance had. The Vikings took to their oars, driving the ship through the choppy waters and around the headland. Once clear of the cove, they raised the sail, catching the strong northerly wind. The Saxon ships fell behind, unable to match their speed. Bjorn laughed in relief. They'll not catch us now. The wind favors us. Torstein nodded, but his joy was tempered by the knowledge that they had been tracked across the sea. Someone had marked their passage and sent word ahead, someone who knew they would return to Northumbria after the autumn raids. There is a traitor among our people, he said quietly to Bjorn. Someone who feeds information to the Saxons. Bjorn's smile faded. Who would dare betray their own kind? That is what we must discover, Torstein replied, his gaze shifting to Orla. She sat with her back straight, eyes fixed on the receding Saxon ships. The sun caught in her hair, setting it ablaze like a beacon against the grey sea. A strange thought occurred to him then, that in taking her, he might have inadvertently brought the means of their salvation as well as their potential destruction. The Ulfbert hummed in its scabbard as if in agreement. The Jarl's longhouse loomed large against the twilight sky, smoke rising from its central hearth to escape through the hole in the roof. Orla stood on the shore, staring at the Norse settlement spread before her, wooden buildings clustered around the central hall, smaller dwellings dotting the hillside, and beyond them, fields lying dormant under a blanket of snow. This was the home of the demons who had terrorized her people for generations. Yet it looked distressingly ordinary, a village not unlike those in Northumbria, albeit built of wood rather than stone. Come, Torstein said, placing a hand on her back to guide her forward. My father will want to see who we have brought back. Orla steeled herself, determined to show no fear. As they walked through the settlement, curious faces peered from doorways and windows. Children ran alongside them, pointing and chattering in their harsh tongue. Women paused in their tasks to stare at her fine woolen gown and the cross embroidered at its neck. Inside the longhouse, firelight gleamed off polished shields and weapons hanging from the walls. Men and women sat at long tables, their conversations dying as Torstein led Orla down the central aisle toward a high seat at the far end. An older man with a silver-streaked beard sat there, his piercing blue eyes, so like Torstein's, watching their approach with keen interest. Beside him sat a woman of similar age, her once golden hair now faded to ash, her fingers adorned with rings and her neck with amber beads. "Father," Torstein said, inclining his head respectfully. "Mother, I have returned." The older man, the Jarl, Orla presumed, rose slowly. "So I see," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "With only one ship where 3 set out, and a Saxon woman in place of the treasure I expected." His eyes hardened. "Explain yourself, my son." Torstein stood his ground, though Orla could sense tension in the set of his shoulders. "The Alfbert guided us to her," he said, drawing the sword and holding it before him. "It called to her across the sea." Murmurs rippled through the gathered Vikings. The Jarl's eyes narrowed. "You risked men and ships for a woman because a sword called her to her?" His voice dripped with skepticism. "Not just any sword," came a new voice, cracked with age but carrying clear authority. The crowd parted as an ancient woman made her way forward, leaning on a staff carved with strange symbols. Her single eye, the other covered by a leather patch, fixed on Orla with unsettling intensity. "Volva Gunhild," Torstein said, bowing his head. "You knew this would happen." The old woman cackled. "I see what the Norns weave, boy. Sometimes clear, sometimes in shadows." She circled Orla, sniffing the air around her like a hound catching a scent. "Yes, this is the one. She carries the other half." Orla stiffened. "What do you mean?" The Volva's eye gleamed. "Show them, girl. Show them what you stole." Torla's hand went involuntarily to her side, where the knife lay hidden. How could this witch know about it? "I stole nothing," she said defiantly. "The knife," Torstein said, his eyes widening in realization. "You have a blade with runes like my sword." With trembling fingers, Orla withdrew the knife from its hiding place. The firelight caught the strange markings etched into its surface, markings that matched those on Torstein's sword. The hall erupted in exclamations. The Jarl rose from his seat, coming forward to examine the knife. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. "It was in my father's hall," Orla replied. "I took it before your son kidnapped me." "The monastery," Torstein said slowly. "The sword came from there. The monk said it belonged to a Norse warrior who fell in Saxon lands." "Not just any warrior," the Volva interjected. "Sigurd Dragonslayer and his bride, Brynhild. Their weapons were forged by the same hand, blessed by the gods themselves. When parted, they seek reunion. When reunited." She smiled, revealing teeth worn to nubs. "Well, that remains to be seen." The Jarl's wife spoke for the first time, her voice gentle but firm. "The girl needs rest and food, not cryptic tales." She rose gracefully, coming to stand before Orla. "I am Sigrid. You will stay in my household for now, as a guest, not a thrall." Orla looked at her in surprise. "A guest? I am your son's captive." Sigrid smiled sadly. "My son was the captive, though he doesn't yet realize it." She took Orla's arm. "Come. We will find you clean clothes and a warm place to sleep. Tomorrow is soon enough to unravel this mystery." As Sigrid led her away, Orla glanced back to see Torstein and his father in heated discussion, the old Volva watching with that same unsettling smile. The knife in her hand seemed to pulse with warmth, drawing her eyes to the sword at Torstein's side. Whatever force had brought them together, Orla was certain of one thing: it would not lead to peace between their peoples. Yet as she followed Sigrid to a small chamber off the main hall, she could not deny the strange certainty that her fate was now bound to that of the Viking who had stolen her from her home. Weeks passed, and winter tightened its grip on the Norse settlement. Orla found herself in a strange position, neither prisoner nor truly free, treated with cautious respect by most of the Vikings, with open curiosity by others. Sigrid had taken her under her protection, teaching her the basics of their language and the customs of their people. Though Orla maintained her Christian faith, praying in private each night, she could not help but absorb the rhythms and beliefs of the Norse world around her. "You have a talent for the loom," Sigrid observed one afternoon as they worked side by side in the women's quarters. Your patterns are different from ours, but pleasing. Orla nodded her thanks, her fingers moving deftly through the warp and weft. My mother taught me. She said a woman's stories are woven into her cloth. Sigrid smiled. Our beliefs are not so different in that. We too weave our fates, though the Norns hold the greater loom. She glanced at Orla's work, where Christian crosses subtly intertwined with Norse knot patterns. You blend our ways together, even as you resist them. Before Orla could respond, the door burst open, and Torstein entered, snow dusting his cloak and hair. His eyes found Orla immediately, as they always seem to do. The Jarl requests your presence, he said. Both of you. Orla set aside her weaving and rose, wrapping a woolen shawl around her shoulders. Though she had adopted some Norse clothing for practicality, trousers beneath her gown for warmth, sturdy boots instead of her thin Saxon slippers, she still wore the cross her mother had given her. In the week since her arrival, she had seen little of Torstein. He spent his days training with the other warriors or in council with his father. When their paths did cross, he maintained a careful distance, though she often caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. The knife remained in her possession, a fact that surprised her. The Jarl had examined it thoroughly before returning it, warning her that using it against any of his people would result in her immediate death. She kept it hidden but close, its presence a comfort in this strange land. As they crossed the settlement toward the longhouse, Orla noticed unusual activity, warriors gathering, supplies being prepared. What's happening? She asked Torstein. Raiders from the east, he replied tersely. They attacked one of our outlying farms yesterday. My father sends men to drive them back. Inside the longhouse, Jarl Magnus stood surrounded by his chief warriors. He looked up as they entered, his expression grim. The Saxon, he said, gesturing Orla forward. The Volva says she must see this. Orla approached warily. On a table before the Jarl lay a man, grievously wounded. Blood soaked the bandages wrapped around his torso, and his breathing came in labored gasps. Finn brought word of the raid, Sigrid explained quietly. He rode through the night to warn us, though he took an arrow for his trouble. Volva Gunhild appeared at Orla's side, her withered hand grasping Orla's wrist with surprising strength. The knife, she commanded. Show it to him. Why? Orla asked, bewildered. How would that help? The blade chooses life or death, the old woman replied cryptically. Show it to him, or he dies for certain. With reluctant fingers, Orla withdrew the knife from its hiding place. As she held it over the wounded man, something strange happened. The runes etched into the blade began to glow with a faint blue light. The dying man's eyes widened, fixed on the knife. The blessing of ear, whispered one of the warriors, making a sign against evil. The Volva cackled. Not evil, fool. Old magic. The knife was forged to heal as well as harm. She looked at Orla. Press it to his wound. Not to cut, to heal. Orla hesitated. I'm not a healer. The blade is, the Volva insisted. You are merely its wielder, as the boy is wielder of the sword. All eyes were upon her. Torstein stepped forward, drawing the elfbert. To her astonishment, it too glowed with the same ethereal light. Together, he said, his voice low. The sword protects, the knife heals. That is their purpose. Something in his tone compelled her. Orla placed the flat of the blade against the wounded man's injury, while Torstein laid the elfbert alongside it. A warmth flowed through her arm, and beneath her fingers, the man's labored breathing eased. When she removed the knife moments later, the bleeding had stopped. The wounded man's color improved before their eyes, and his breathing steadied. The hall erupted in exclamations of wonder and fear. The Jarl stepped forward, his expression a mixture of awe and suspicion. What sorcery is this? He demanded. The Volva smiled her toothless smile. Not sorcery, Jarl. The will of the gods. These weapons were forged in fire blessed by both Odin and the White Christ. They recognize no boundaries between our peoples. Orla stared at the knife in her hand, then at Torstein, who looked equally shocked. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "The monk at the monastery," Torstein said slowly. "He said the sword belonged to a great Norse warrior who fell in Saxon lands. What if that warrior converted to Christianity?" Orla finished. "What if the weapons carry both blessings?" The Jarl's face darkened. "Blasphemy! No true Norse warrior would abandon the old gods." "Many have," Sigrid said quietly. "In the Western Isles, in the Saxon kingdoms. They trade the old ways for the new god." A tense silence fell over the hall. Orla felt the weight of hostile stares, the fragile acceptance she had built crumbling around her. "The Eastern raiders will be here by tomorrow," the Jarl said at last. "We have no time for religious debates. If these weapons can protect our people, that is all that matters for now." He fixed Orla with a hard stare. "You will remain with us, Saxon. Your knife and my son's sword may be the difference between victory and defeat." As the council dispersed to prepare for the coming battle, Torstein remained by Orla's side. "You're afraid," he observed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Orla nodded, seeing no point in denying it. "Your people already view me with suspicion. Now they will see me as a witch." "Or a healer sent by the gods," he countered. "It depends on how the tale is told." He hesitated, then added, "I will ensure you are protected, whatever comes." Their eyes met, and Orla was startled by the sincerity she saw in his. For all that separated them, faith, culture, the blood spilled between their peoples, in that moment, she felt a connection that transcended those divisions. "Why?" she asked simply. Torstein's hand moved to the hilt of his sword. "Because our fates are bound together, for good or ill. I feel it as surely as I feel the blade at my side." As he walked away, Orla clutched the knife, its warmth seeming to seep into her very bones. She had come to this land as a captive, determined to escape at the first opportunity. Now, as battle approached and ancient magic stirred in her hand, she wondered if escape was even possible, or if the path forward led not away from the Vikings, but deeper into their world. The Eastern raiders came with the dawn, their war cries echoing across the frozen landscape. Torstein stood with his father's warriors on the ridge overlooking the settlement, the Ulfbert sword gleaming in the pale winter light. Below, women and children had been gathered in the longhouse for protection, with a small guard left to defend them. Among those in the longhouse was Orla, though not by choice. Torstein had insisted she remain behind, safe from the fighting, but she had argued fiercely against it. "If the knife heals, I should be where the wounded are," she had said, her green eyes flashing with determination. "And if you fall," he had countered. "The knife is useless in dead hands." In the end, his father had settled the matter, ordering her to remain with Sigrid and the other women. But the look she had given Torstein as he left had burned with a promise, this was not finished between them. Now, as the raiders surged up the slope toward them, Torstein pushed thoughts of Orla aside, focusing on the battle ahead. These were not Saxons but men from the eastern fjords, rivals for trade and territory, led by a chieftain known for his brutality. "Hold the line," shouted Jarl Magnus, his voice carrying over the clash of steel and wood. "Drive them back to the sea." Torstein threw himself into the fighting, the Ulfbert moving in his hand with that same uncanny precision he had felt since claiming it. Where other blades turned or broke against shield and mail, the sword cut through as if they were cloth. Warriors fell before him, their blood staining the snow. For a time, it seemed the defenders would prevail. The raiders' first charge broke against their shield wall, and many fell as they retreated down the slope. But then a horn sounded from the trees to the east, and a second force emerged, warriors who had circled around while their comrades engaged from the front. "The settlement," someone shouted. "They're heading for the longhouse." Cold fear gripped Torstein's heart. The guard left to defend the women and children was too small to withstand this new threat. Orla was in danger. "Bjorn," he called to his shield brother. "With me." They raced down the slope, gathering a handful of warriors as they went. Ahead, they could see the second raiding party approaching the longhouse, where the few remaining defenders were forming a desperate line of resistance. As Torstein neared, he he saw something that made his blood run cold. Orla standing before the longhouse entrance, the knife in her hand gleaming with that same blue light that had manifested during the healing. "Get back inside," he roared, but his voice was lost in the din of battle. The raiders reached the defenders' line, breaking through with savage efficiency. Torstein fought his way forward, the Ulfbert cutting a path through the enemy. But he was still too far away when he saw a massive warrior break from the group, charging directly toward Orla. Time seemed to slow. Torstein saw Orla brace herself, the knife held before her not in fear but in defiance. The raider raised his axe, a killing blow aimed at her head. Then, impossibly, she moved, not retreating but stepping into the attack, the knife flashing upward to meet the descending axe. A blinding light erupted where the weapons met, throwing the raider backward as if struck by lightning. Torstein reached her side as she staggered, catching her before she fell. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning for injuries. Orla shook her head, her gaze fixed on the fallen raider, who lay motionless on the ground, his axe shattered beside him. "The knife," she whispered. "It protected me." There was no time to marvel at this new development. More raiders were approaching, and Torstein pushed Orla behind him, raising the Ulfbert to meet them. What happened next would later be recounted in sagas throughout the northern lands. The sword and knife, wielded together, created a defense that no enemy could breach. Where Torstein struck with the sword, death followed. Where Orla touched the knife to wounded defenders, life returned. By midday, the raiders were in retreat, leaving their dead scattered across the blooded snow. The settlement had held, though at great cost. Many warriors had fallen, and more were gravely wounded. In the aftermath, as the survivors gathered to tend their injuries and mourn their dead, Torstein found Orla kneeling beside a young woman whose arm had been nearly severed by an axe blow. The knife glowed in her hand as she pressed it to the wound, murmuring words that sounded neither Norse nor Saxon but something older, more primal. Before his eyes, the woman's torn flesh began to knit together, the bleeding slowing then stopping altogether. When Orla removed the knife, the wound remained, but it was no longer life-threatening, a scar rather than a mortal injury. Orla looked up, meeting his gaze. Exhaustion lined her face, but there was a strength in her eyes that had not been there before. "It takes from me to give to them," she said quietly. "Each healing costs something." Torstein knelt beside her. "Then you must rest. You've done enough." She shook her head. "There are more wounded. I can help them." "Not if you kill yourself doing it," he insisted, taking her arm. "The knife may have power, but you are still flesh and blood." Their gazes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Orla nodded, allowing him to help her to her feet. As they made their way toward the longhouse, Jarl Magnus approached, his armor splattered with blood, a fresh wound across his cheek. "The Saxon woman," he said, his eyes moving from Orla to the knife she still clutched. "She fought alongside our people." "She saved many lives," Torstein replied, a note of challenge in his voice. The Jarl studied Orla for a moment, then inclined his head in a gesture that was almost respectful. "So it seems. Perhaps the Volva's words hold truth after all." As he walked away, Orla leaned heavily against Torstein's side. "What happens now?" she asked. Torstein looked down at her, at the knife that had chosen her as surely as the sword had chosen him. "Now," he said, "we discover what the gods, yours and mine, intend for us." The words hung in the air between them, a promise and a question both. Whatever came next, they would face it together, the Saxon healer and the Viking warrior, bound by weapons forged in the distant past for a purpose only beginning to reveal itself. Spring came early that year, melting the snow from the fields and thawing the frozen fjord. With it came changes to the settlement, and to Orla herself. In the month since the battle against the Eastern raiders, her status had shifted from captive to something approaching respect. The knife's healing powers had saved many lives, earning her the reluctant gratitude of even the most suspicious Vikings. Some still made signs against evil when she passed, but others sought her out, bringing their sick and injured to benefit from the knife's magic. Orla had learned much of their language and customs, guided by Sigrid, who treated her more like a daughter than an enemy. She still prayed to her Christian god each night, but she had also come to understand the Norse world view, their belief in fate and honor, their connection to the land and sea. And then there was Torstein. Their shared experience in battle had forged a bond between them that neither fully understood but both increasingly relied upon. They trained together daily, learning how the sword and knife complemented each other, discovering new aspects of the weapon's powers. When wielded in concert, the blades could create a shield of light that no normal weapon could penetrate. When pressed to the earth, they could sense approaching danger from miles away. They were made for war, Torstein observed one afternoon as they sat on a rocky outcrop overlooking the fjord. But also for protection. Orla nodded, turning the knife in her hands. The runes etched into its surface no longer seemed alien to her, she had learned to read some of them with the Volva's guidance. The oldest rune means bridge, she said. I think these weapons were meant to bridge worlds, not just to heal or harm, but to connect. Torstein's gaze shifted from the knife to her face. Like they've connected us. The question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Orla felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. Perhaps, she admitted. Though I never would have chosen such a connection. Nor I, he said with a wry smile. Yet here we are. Here they were indeed, a Saxon Christian woman and a Norse warrior, sitting side by side as something closer than friends but caught in a space between worlds that neither fully belonged to anymore. A shout from below interrupted their moment. A ship was approaching the settlement, a Saxon vessel by the look of its square sail. Torstein rose quickly, his hand going to the Ulfbert's hilt. Stay here, he told Orla. I'll see what this means. But Orla was already on her feet, the knife clutched in her hand. That's my father's standard, she said, her voice tight with emotion. I would know it anywhere. They raced down to the shore, where the Jarl and his warriors were already gathering, weapons at the ready. The Saxon ship approached cautiously, a white flag of truce flying alongside Lord Fletcher's banner. As the vessel drew closer, Orla could make out figures on its deck, armed men, yes, but not in the numbers needed for an attack. And at the bow stood a tall figure with graying hair that could only be her father. He's come for me, she whispered, a storm of conflicting emotions washing over her. After months of captivity, rescue should have brought only joy. Yet she felt a deep reluctance that took her by surprise. Will you go with him? Torstein asked, his voice carefully neutral. Orla clutched the knife tighter. I don't know. The ship reached the shore, and under the watchful eyes of the Norse warriors, a small party disembarked. Lord Fletcher led them, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Orla. The relief on his face was palpable. Orla, he called out, taking a step forward before being blocked by the Jarl's men. Thank God you're alive. Jarl Magnus stepped forward, his hand on his sword hilt. You come under a flag of truce, Saxon. State your purpose. Lord Fletcher drew himself up, speaking in careful, accented Norse. I come for my daughter, whom your son took from our lands. I offer ransom, gold, silver, whatever you demand. The Jarl's eye shifted to Orla. The woman came as a captive, true. But she has earned a place among us. Her fate is her own to decide. All eyes turned to Orla, standing beside Torstein, the knife visible in her hand. Her father's expression shifted from relief to confusion as he took in her Norse clothing, her confident stance among the Vikings. Orla, he questioned. What is this? Have they bewitched you? She stepped forward, switching to her native tongue. I am not bewitched, father. But much has changed since I was taken. She held up the knife. This blade, it has powers. It has chosen me as its wielder. Lord Fletcher's face darkened. Pagan magic. Child, whatever they've told you, it's a deception. Come home, return to the true faith. My faith remains, she assured him. But I have learned that God's works are more mysterious than our priests would have us believe. She glanced at Torstein, who watched the exchange with tense attention. The knife and sword were forged for a purpose, to heal the divide between our peoples. Her father shook his head in disbelief. These savages raid our shores, kill our people, and you speak of healing divides? They've poisoned your mind, daughter. And what of the Saxon raids on Norse settlements? She countered. The slaughter of Viking settlers who came in peace? There is blood on both sides, father. Lord Fletcher's expression hardened. So you choose them over your own family? Over the people who raised you? The pain in his voice cut Orla deeply. I choose a path that might lead to peace, she said quietly. The knife has shown me visions of a time when Norse and Saxon live side by side, when the endless cycle of raids and revenge might end. Impossible, her father scoffed. Oil and water do not mix. Yet here I stand, she replied, neither fully Saxon nor Norse, but something in between. She took a deep breath. I will return with you, father. Torstein made a sharp movement beside her, but she continued. But only for a visit. To show you what I have learned, to help you understand. And then I must return here, to continue the work that has been entrusted to me. Murmurs rippled through both groups, surprise from the Vikings, dismay from the Saxons. Lord Fletcher's face flushed with anger. You would return to your captors? Have you no shame, girl? They are not my captors anymore, Orla said firmly. And yes, I would return. The knife and sword must remain together, their power diminishes when they are separated. Her father's gaze shifted to Torstein, understanding dawning in his eyes. It's him, isn't it? You've fallen for this heathen. Orla felt heat rise to her cheeks but held her ground. My decisions are not based on such feelings, but on a higher purpose. Will you accept my terms, father? A visit home, and then my return. For a long moment, Lord Fletcher stood in silence, internal conflict evident on his face. Then, slowly, he nodded. A visit. And we will discuss your higher purpose when you are away from their influence. Relief washed over Orla. She turned to Torstein, switching back to Norse. I will go with him for a time, she said. To show him what we've learned, to begin building a bridge between our peoples. Torstein's face was a mask, but she could see the turmoil in his eyes. And if he refuses to let you return? Then the knife will guide me back, she said simply. As it guided you to me. Their gazes held for a long moment, volumes spoken in silence. Then Torstein turned to Jarl Magnus. I will accompany her, he declared. The Jarl frowned. You would walk willingly into Saxon lands? They could kill you the moment you step ashore. They could try, Torstein replied, his hand on the Elfbert's hilt. But the sword would not permit it. He looked back at Orla. The blade brought me to her for a reason. That reason is not fulfilled by letting her go alone. Lord Fletcher bristled. I will not have this Viking in my home. Then I will not return with you, Orla said firmly. The knife and sword must remain together. That is non-negotiable. A tense silence fell over the gathering. Then, unexpectedly, Volva Gunhild emerged from the crowd, her ancient frame bent but her single eye sharp as ever. The Saxon lord fears what he does not understand, she said, her voice carrying despite its age. Show him, girl. Show him what the knife can do. Orla hesitated, then nodded. She approached a Norse warrior who had been injured in a hunting accident the day before, his arm bound in blood-soaked bandages. May I? She asked him. The man nodded, extending his injured arm. Orla unwrapped the bandage, revealing a deep, festering gash. She placed the knife against the wound, and before the assembled company, the blade began to glow with that now familiar blue light. The warrior gasped, not in pain but in relief, as the wound visibly closed, the infection receding before their eyes. When she removed the knife, the injury was healed, leaving only a pale scar where moments before there had been an open wound. Lord Fletcher stared in astonishment. How is this possible? The knife heals, Orla said simply. The sword protects. Together, they offer a path forward, not just for Torstein and me, but for all our peoples. Her father's eyes moved from the healed warrior to his daughter's face, seeing her in a new light. And you believe this magic comes from God? I believe it comes from a power that transcends the names we give it, Orla replied. Saxon, Norse, these are human divisions. The weapons recognize no such boundaries. For the first time, uncertainty showed in Lord Fletcher's expression. I must confer with my men, he said at last. As he withdrew to speak with the Saxon party, Torstein stepped closer to Orla. You would really return to them? He asked quietly. She turned to face him, studying the features that had become so familiar to her, the strong jaw, the piercing blue eyes, the scar that cut across his brow from some long-ago battle. I would return, she said, but not to them. To you. The admission hung in the air between them, the first acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing for months. Torstein's expression softened, and for a moment, Orla thought he might reach for her. Instead, he glanced toward the Saxon party. Your father will not accept this easily. Nor will mine. Then we must show them another way, she said. Beginning with this journey. Lord Fletcher returned, his expression resigned. You may bring the Viking, he conceded. But he will be watched at all times. Any sign of treachery, and he forfeits his life. And any harm that comes to my son, Jarl Magnus interrupted, stepping forward, will be repaid tenfold on Saxon shores. Orla looked between the two leaders, so similar in their pride and stubbornness, yet divided by generations of bloodshed. No harm will come to either side, she said firmly. The knife and sword will ensure it. As preparations began for the journey, a small Norse party to accompany Torstein, provisions gathered, terms negotiated between the wary leaders, Orla felt a strange sense of rightness settle over her. The path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but for the first time since her capture, she was choosing her direction rather than being carried along by fate. The knife in her hand hummed with energy, matching the pulse of the sword at Torstein's side. Whatever awaited them in Saxon lands, they would face it together, the healer and the protector, forging a bridge between worlds that had known only division and hatred. As the sun set over the fjord, casting long shadows across the water, Orla made a silent promise, to herself, to Torstein, to the mysterious weapons that had bound their destinies together. This journey would not end in more bloodshed, but in the beginning of something new, a saga yet to be written, a future where the children of Norse and Saxon might know peace instead of the endless cycle of raid and revenge. The knife glowed briefly in response, as if accepting her oath. And across the gathering, Torstein's hand went to his sword hilt, his eyes meeting hers with understanding. Their path was clear, though the destination remained shrouded in mystery, forward together, into the unknown.